that's my just high-level overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the UC and finance to go over some of these, what would you recommend, either the LAO or the auditor, of a way to there's a list that we had in the audit. There's a list here. They're kind of apples and oranges. How could we best have an analysis to see which of these programs are still in existence and how they're embedded in the university budget?
Well, I think we'd have to work with UC on that. You know, because a lot of these programs are now internally managed by UC, we'd really have to rely on them to tell us which programs are still funding, what are the fund sources, are they still using state funding. So we'd be happy to work with your staff on that and compile a list of these programs that are still in existence. I think a lot of these programs here are no longer in existence, but we'd have to work with UC on that.
Some I think clearly are, and UC talks about it.
Right.
Some, you know, we say there's general fund, but if you think about core funds, I think public funds, which are fees paid by students and taxpayer general fund, are part of the core fund. So I think that basically cohort of dollars is what we're looking for. Okay, thank you. University of California.
Thank you, and I'd like to acknowledge the work that went in from both of the speakers that spoke prior in identifying these programs and compiling the lists. I want to start by saying that the UC Office of the President has stated that it will develop and will implement a process for regularly evaluating campus expenditures from core funds. This was something that was requested in the audit report. Core funds, as you correctly noted, are revenues from state general fund, but also student tuition and fees and non-resident supplemental tuition and fees and other UC general funds. So I just want to assure you that we're going to continue to take appropriate measures to ensure that our expenditures from core funds are aligned with the university's core missions, and that mission does include research and public service. It is not just instruction. Mm-hmm. So some of the programs that are listed in the attachment, and we touched on this a little bit already, and most particularly the MIND and the AIDS research are programs that past legislators have specifically funded, and they continue to have, you know, some constituencies that closely follow the state support item for them. A lot of internal groups have said that these programs could be funded from other funds, and these programs do receive significant amount of other funding, as the review that was referenced concluded. And they did recommend finding alternative sources of funding despite this sort of overwhelming support from many constituencies who argue for continued state funding. And the arguments that they make for continued state funding is that it's an important component of the overall work that's being done in those research areas that enables the state funding, helps to enable them to draw down federal sponsored research, outside funding, for purposes of conducting a much broader research program. So with respect to AIDS and MIND, I think those would be two examples that would be difficult for the university to eliminate from core funds expenditures, but we would be happy to readdress and reevaluate that. I'd like to address for a moment the list that the legislative analyst has compiled. So particularly grateful to have this list available, and it probably represents a lot of research that went into it over the years, as you can see by the first year of funding that's indicated in each of the columns. We did do a preliminary analysis. We're going to need to dig a bit deeper with some of these items, and we came up with a couple sort of groups that we can group things into. And so one of the groups are things that are still ongoing expenditures that we know of. So if you look in the left-hand column, you'll see programs like the AIDS research, the assembly database at Berkeley, the statewide database at Berkeley, the labor centers, which you mentioned, welfare and policy research program, the MIND Institute, which we mentioned, and then there's the category of enrollment funding. That continues. UC Merced, these funding items also continue, as well as funds related to Drew Medical Center, the UC Riverside School of Medicine, for instance, and as was referenced, a student financial aid. So over on the right-hand side, we also discussed a little bit the student academic preparation programs and outreach. And some state general fund that's been appropriated in prior years that are related to maintenance and compensation. So that's a category of on this list that we've identified, at least preliminarily, as still ongoing, still receiving state general fund. Obviously, there's another category. Some of those categories, as we mentioned before, remain high priorities from the legislature, and we do hear from legislators that support the continuation of that funding. There are some other areas where things have been discontinued. So if you're to look again at the left-hand side of the column, things like microelectronic research, the Animal Research Alternative, Alzheimer and Geriatrics Program, and many other on the list, including things like enrollment in nursing. These are things where state general fund is no longer being used to fund those things. The Mexico City facility, et cetera. On the right-hand side, there are almost equally as many. So this represents about over half. The discontinued represents about over half of the expenditures here. And again, this is very preliminary, but we think we're on pretty solid ground saying that there's no funding being expended in programs that range from everything from the UCSD Model Charter School to UCLA Program and Advanced Policy Institute creation of Internet resource. So there are many of those, and we're happy to continue to work with you to provide a more full list. There are a couple programs on there where we're quite frankly not sure yet, but those are only a couple programs. So we're continuing to look at that. And so hopefully that's helpful. I just would like to close by saying that when we're looking at programs and evaluating programs, this is something that our campuses do regularly, and it is true that these determinations are made at the campus level. As I mentioned, the university would be happy to engage in a process of tracking and monitoring as suggested. There are some other concerns that we have, and I think those concerns are that just looking at a specific program, any program which may have an impact on our research and our public service mission, but not directly impact our instructional mission, is still a very important part of the university. We are on the spectrum of public higher education tasked with granting doctoral. We educate the next generation of nurses and doctors and pharmacists and veterinarians. So it is a very important, research is a very important component of our overall mission, and certainly innovators and entrepreneurs who graduate from the university go on to open businesses, fill workforce needs, are also equally as important, and research is a critical component to what they do. So 6 schools of medicine and 5 academic medical centers, the research component is very important. So I would just close with that, and if there are any questions, happy to try and address them.
Okay. Department of Finance.
Maritza Urquiza with the Department of Finance. We don't have specific comments about these programs. I would just note that in eliminating earmarks, the administration has been concerned with mandating the university's spending priorities, and through earmarks, it restricts the UC region's ability to manage its operations and resources. We believe that there are more appropriate ways to engage with the UC to achieve the state's priorities.
Okay, thank you. I just have a few intro questions for the UC. I wondered if you can go back and revisit the statements made by our state auditor staff. She paraphrased either a conversation or a report from the Office of the President and Mr. Brostrom that an example of 3 of these programs could be essentially potentially not eliminated, but funded through other sources, private funds, federal funds. Is that an accurate characterization of that comment?
I think that's probably an accurate characterization of what our chief financial officer was stating. I think we always have sort of an ongoing process where we're looking to see where alternative sources of revenue other than other than core funds are available. And part of what we want to do with core funds is leverage non-core funds to bring them into the state. So if it's federal research dollars, for instance, there has to be a specific threshold of human infrastructure and facilities that allows our principal investigators, faculty, for instance, to apply for and win grants in a competitive process. And we want that funding to come to California. We don't want to lose it to North Carolina. We don't want to lose it to, heaven forbid, Texas or Florida. So that's our view, is that we really need to look closely and carefully and see if by removing state general fund, we start to diminish the ability to not only achieve the research, but also to draw in external sources of funding beyond state taxpayer and tuition dollars.
Okay, and knowing that there is a desire from, I think, the legislature to potentially look at these and redirecting. Last year we looked at redirecting the financial aid money to student enrollments. Of course, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we know that, as Mr. Irwin talked about an hour ago, some of the money that we spend for research has huge economic development. I see it a mile from my house over the Mine Center, so I understand that. But does the UC? I mean, because you're getting beat up from your regents, your alumni, your donors, and the legislature for enrollment policy, for kind of squeezing access. And do you ever look at some of these and think, maybe we could redirect this to funding the core, which is, when you ask the public, what does a university do? They may know about research, but they think first and foremost they educate students to get a degree, to get a good job. And so, do you ever internally, every year look at these and thinking, maybe we could redirect and phase out core support for some of these programs?
So I wouldn't say that that's an annual process, and it's a very extensive process. I would say that the Office of the President has certain expectations through our allocation process to the campuses, and that the campuses, if ever an issue is to arise, we certainly dig deeper into that. I think probably to try and respond to your question, we're constantly looking, in particularly the recession, the state cuts, the increases in expenditure, the increase in costs that the university incurred over the past, say, since 2008, has really caused us to look creatively at a lot of what we do. And I think the current year's budget actually reflects that. We have incremental costs that are going to go up, but we're offsetting a large portion of that through several programs that are intended to save funding, so we don't have those revenues. They're alternative revenues, or we're reducing our cost structure. So things like our own captive insurance program, or things that we can do with liquidity management that results in alternative revenues to help us meet what our incremental increases each year. So that's one area where we're trying to think creatively. As far as taking programmatic funding that's dedicated for one use, cutting it, and applying it to a use that traditionally has been the domain of the state, and that is enrollment growth for California students. We do not agree that the state should supplant its own, what we view as a responsibility to enroll and provide funding for adequate resources for enrollment growth of California students. We also feel that right now, at a time when the university is enrolling more underrepresented minority, more first-generation college goers, and more low-income students than ever before, we have to redouble our efforts to ensure that the quality of education for those students is the same as in prior generations. And quality is not just a talking point here, because by quality, what we're talking about is investing in faculty, investing in TAs, investing in equipment and infrastructure for teaching so that students can get out in 4 years if they want to. That impacts affordability. That means there's debt at graduation if they borrow is going to be less. That means they become a taxpayer and enter the workforce sooner. So these are important things, and programmatically, the overall ecosystem of a public research university is dependent on research. It's integrated into our DNA. We want to provide access, but we want to provide access to that college transfer or freshman who wants to be a doctor, who wants to go to medical school at UC as well. So we have to sort of try and maintain the ecosystem, if you will, of our public research university. It is the space we occupy on the spectrum of higher education in California, and we think the community colleges are great and that CSU is great. We want to be great, and we all three, there's a differentiation. We do separate things, and that's something that's a big concern for us, and frankly, that's part of the enrollment growth ask for graduate students.
Yeah, Mr. Chavez?
And I really appreciate all that comment, Mr. Flaherty, but I'm going to go back to this issue. Ms. Fullerton, in your report here you talk about it took 4 months to get the information, and you have 18 programs. Do you have the comprehensive list now, do you think?
That was the list that they were able to confirm for us was what they thought was a comprehensive list. Based on what the LAO has produced and what Mr. Flaherty just said, it may not be. What we know is that this money specifically has been identified by the UC as funding that was specifically spent in 2014-15 for these programs.
So it may not be a total comprehensive list then. Also in your report, you're in here, you talk about it take 4 months to get it because there was no way of tracking it. So, Mr. Flaherty, are you now tracking this? Is there somebody responsible for this?
We're in the process of developing and implementing a procedure for tracking and evaluating core funds expenditures beyond what we already do with.
So we're not.
Pardon me?
We're not. We don't have anything.
We're not quite there. We're not quite there yet,
Okay.
I guess would be the answer.
You know, back when I used to run organizations, whenever I ran things like this, I always found that it was, you know, staff has ability to kind of let things roll because the excitement today won't be the excitement next week. And so you got to some way make it important to the people that to get this done. You know, back in my other life, I would just like, you know, I'm going to defund everybody until you show me why you need to have that. And then I'd get a lot of excitement. Boy, I'd get every list up immediately, and we'd be able to track it like that, and somebody would figure out how we're going to do this.
We should put you chair next year of this committee.
I'd love to chair this committee. So I think, you know, we'll go through this. You know, $337 million is that much? No, but it is money. We're talking about some of the other things we're doing. So I'm really appreciate this presentation, Ms. Fullerton. I think you overturned a rock, and a lot of little snakes are popping out, and hopefully we'll look at this. I would just recommend that we do next year maybe, since we're all going to be here for 8-10 years, bring it back. You know, I'd like to defund it all, but we won't. So bring it back and see how well we do next time.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. And I guess I just want to respond to you, Mr. Flaherty, is that you know, we don't take these issues lightly as far as looking to, you know, rob Peter to pay Paul, but, you know, frankly, it's been frustrating the last, you know, few years in growing costs in medical services and other needs. And, you know, we had competing priorities, childcare, housing, transportation, and, you know, we're in an era of limited means and growing needs and desires and wants of our society and the state as far as providing this. And so, you know, I think it is time to take a different look. And I know I brought this up recently with you, and it raised some eyebrows and concerns, because that historically hasn't been the case. That the state has, to the extent possible, fully funded enrollment as much as we can, but we've seen that's had some side impacts as far as increasing more non-resident enrollment and decreasing access for Californians. And I know you disagree, but I think the auditor backs it up. The numbers speak for themselves. And so going forward, I think we are going to dig deeper and not looking forward, new money every year, but looking back and seeing, where we have been spending our money. And is this the top priority? Is this the highest and best use of scarce core resources, both state general fund dollars and the monies commingled with student fee revenue? And so I think that's our job going forward. Yes, can you respond to that?
I just want to add one thing. I think when looking at and evaluating state general fund or core funds uses, that's a worthwhile exercise. I think we also have to look at the overall needs of the university, other than just our desire to grow enrollment of undergraduates. There are worthwhile programs. $2 billion worth of deferred maintenance is not pretty, but it's necessary, and the bill is coming due on those things. The best expenditure of funds that get redirected may not actually be towards something that requires permanent and ongoing support ever more into the future, which is what enrollment growth is. That's why we feel like the original master plan and the state's education code that confirms or reaffirms the state's historic desire to fund enrollment growth is so important, because that's the wheelhouse, we feel, for a state contribution to our students. We do have other programs. The SAPEP programs may be a good place for redirecting funding other than towards enrollment growth, but there are a variety of other programmatic areas and expenditures that we do need to try and support as best we can.
Yeah. And I concur. It's not a one size fits all approach. It's not a sledgehammer. It's more of a scalpel in this. And you're not alone. This isn't just UC. We need to be doing this with the CSU, with DMV, with Department of Corrections. With everybody, every state government department. It's a new day in California to look at these in an era of limited means and our needs ever increasing. So with that, I do. Man. Kevin McCarthy. Just add an H. No, just kidding. I'll get recalled. But I would like to note that the main budget item we're going to hold open, and with that, we're going to pass around a plan of an interim proposal related to enrollment growth and funding from the state of California. And so take a couple seconds here while we pass it out. We'll make sure you have this and some members of the audience before I go through it, and look for a motion and a second and some discussion on this. Okay, so we should all have the plan in front of us. So essentially, this subcommittee today is going to propose a 6-year plan to increase California student enrollment and cap non-resident enrollment. We've been discussing this issue of enrollment and budgeting for the last year and a half, certainly under my leadership, but before, I know the subcommittee has been working on these issues. And this is an old conversation, and we want to begin a new chapter as far as coming forth with a plan that we think is a responsible, three-pronged approach to focus on enrollment growth here in California. We also know that we've heard as far as the rationing of access for higher education in California, from our state auditor, and from the LAO, raising many compelling questions and issues on how UC determines their spending priorities and outlining opportunities for making sound adjustments. And therefore, we're taking all of these elements together. Essentially, we're taking the issues we've heard about enrollment growth, the issues as far as non-resident growth enrollment, the issues as far as Californians getting shortchanged, the issues as far as UC potentially making some smart adjustments, and the issues as far as California stepping to the plate as well. So with that, this plan would increase California undergraduate enrollment by 30,000 over the next 6 years. And at the same time, it would reduce non-resident enrollment by about 10,000 students. We understand that UC cannot change course overnight. Frankly, we've gotten to the point over about 6 years, and so we're putting forth with a plan to get out of this in the next 6 years. We also want to focus on the issue that Mr. Chavez and I just focused on increased oversight of the university to look at innovative and smart ways to potentially redirect. So we'd like to create an Office of the Inspector General to help us scrutinize some budgeting practices and some opportunities for redirection. And this entity would report to the governor and the Senate and the Assembly. Certainly last year, we figured out that this subcommittee discovered that we had roughly $37, I believe, million of financial aid money that was inappropriately being directed to non-resident students, and that money should be focused on Californians. And so we do think there's an opportunity to find more savings with more work. Now the big issue, how do you pay for this plan? It's essentially a $500 million plan at the end of the 6th year. We think that there should be a shared sacrifice in paying for it. So essentially, it's not a cheap plan, but we think it's one that's worthy, and we need to invest in the future of California enrollment. And you know, I think what the UC has said all along is we wouldn't enroll so many non-residents if we had more money. And so I think it all comes down to money. We like diversity in the classroom. Certainly we like that. California diversity, international diversity. But I think the non-resident explosion has been born upon economics. And so what we're putting forth with here is a plan to have the state of California put increased resources in general fund, the UC provide more efficiencies, and out-of-state students pay higher tuition. It's a 25-25-50 plan. State of California's general fund piece would be 25%. UC efficiencies would be 25%. The other 50% would come from out-of-state fee increases. Some may ask, you know, how could you charge more for out-of-state tuition? The reality is this would put basically a 3.7% surcharge on top of the 8% increases that are happening now and the 5% over the next few years, and frankly put us on par with universities like the University of Michigan, where their non-resident tuition is $10,000 more than California charges for non-residents. We think that there's an appetite for this. We think that certainly with the demand going down or frankly with the supply going down, for non-residents, there will be 10,000 fewer slots available for non-residents, going to 10%. There will be a strong desire still for some of these, frankly, very wealthy non-residents who are paying the out-of-state tuition to pay a little bit more to help Californians attend the premier University of California system. So this is the proposal we have. We'd like to adopt it today as an interim action. We will come back in the final budget after the May revised hearing. And so with that, I would certainly entertain any questions or comments and hopefully a motion at the appropriate time.
Yes, I'd like a question, comment, and then I'd like to make a motion.
Sure.
First of all, Chair, I think you really highlighted three great points. So I'd just like to acknowledge that we've been doing this for a couple of years, and I think the 30,000 increase in California students is a very good goal. I would like to ask a question from the UC, though. Is that would that meet the requirement that you're seeing as far as turning away students? the 30,000 increase in California students, would that meet the requirement what we're talking about?